This is episode 7 of the Growth Tigers podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to the Growth Tigers podcast. I'm your host Brian Cotter and it's my job to bring inspiring entrepreneurs and their stories to you around the world. Usually our guests will be living or working in Vietnam and creating value either for the local market or building a global product. Today is slightly different as we have an entrepreneur with Vietnam in her blood, but her journey hasn't brought her here yet. She was one of the youngest ever named to the Silicon Valley's top 40 under 40 list, is an active advisor, speaker, writer, and connector around the world, and is the founder of StartUpRising, a community of tech leaders who believe that innovation is inclusion. I'm very excited for this interview, so let's get to it. Welcome to the show, Lucy Keoni.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you fill in some of the gaps I left out in the introduction and tell us how you got to be where you are today?
Absolutely. I'd love to share my story and my journey. My mother is from Vietnam. And she fled Vietnam in 1980, late 1980, and she was pregnant with me. Had my older brother and sister who were 10 and 11 at the time, and it took her about 3 different trips to successfully leave. And she did so on a boat, and we were very fortunate to make it to Malaysia, and the government and the refugee camp took us in. They didn't have facilities for my birth, and so we moved to the Philippines, where I was born in a refugee camp in Bataan. And again, we were lucky to get sponsored by a Catholic church in Iowa, in the U.S. And so we made our way to the U.S. and it was interesting because my mother had like a 4th grade education. She's from Guangdong, and being in a foreign land without knowledge of the language, having 3 young kids, one of which was a newborn, could be, I could imagine, a very stressful and traumatic. But on top of that, the church wanted us to assimilate and not speak our language and gave us all American names, and she was not having that. She wanted us to stay close to our roots, so she moved us to San Jose, California, where we had a very strong Vietnamese community. We, like most other immigrants or refugees, lacked a lot of resources, and struggled quite a bit with poverty and whatnot. And my mom, luckily, was very resilient and very much a hustler, and so she worked multiple jobs and went to ESL school at night, and then she eventually went on to cosmetology school. And by the time I was 7, she had her own beauty salon. So it was interesting in terms of the dynamics in our family. My sister ended up, pregnant at a very young age and dropped out of school. And my older brother enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve. And so I was the only one left at home to support my mom and help her with the business. So imagine a 7-year-old learning how to do financial statements and reconciliation, having to do inventory and help run the business after school and on the weekends. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it, but now looking back, I was like, wow, that was my firsthand experience at entrepreneurship. So, between 7 and 17, I really ran the business with my mother. I went on to university. I was the first in my lineage to go to university. My older brother eventually went to college, but it took him a little bit longer, having been in the Army and whatnot. So I went to first UC Berkeley and then transferred back home to be closer to my mom, who needed some support. And I finished out at Santa Clara University. First went into finance, and my career in finance helped me to understand that, not only minorities, but many women as well didn't have a solid grasp of financial literacy. And I wanted to do whatever I could to change that. And so I built a program in San Jose for under-resourced youth to learn about financial literacy, economic parity, and entrepreneurship. And then I launched a program called Girls Going Places. It's a conference, and I brought 1,000 girls in from all over the state of California and paired them with professional businesswomen who mentored them for the day and taught them the same principles about like financial literacy, the power of entrepreneurship, and again, economic parity. So I did that for about 2 years, and that was great. And then I took a sabbatical and traveled the world, went back to Vietnam for the first time, and saw what my mom sacrificed, having to leave her entire family. None of our family ever made it out of Vietnam, and saw like the extreme poverty and the conditions that they lived in, how fortunate I am to have gotten out of that. And when I came back, I was like racking my mind thinking about like, how can I make a bigger difference? I can continue to do these like one-off projects, which, does make an impact, but how do I scale impact? And it hit me that like tech was the big catalyst for that. And this was like in 2007, 2008, and mobile was still relatively new. But I knew that little phone could change the world in terms of providing access to education and resources. So without a technical background, I ended up at a mobile media startup, first as director of operations. So I was handling like all the finance and human resources, and went into like business development and startups. I mean, it was like a 5-person team. So at a startup, you end up doing all kinds of things.
Doing everything,
hats.
Right?
Yeah. So I just took such a liking to product itself. So I ended up getting Scrum certified and learning the whole process, and really got involved with UI, UX, and QA. I did everything but code. I even oversaw our overseas teams in the Ukraine and Canada, the engineering teams. So that was great. I was able to experience like pretty much every aspect of a startup. And then about 3 years in, apps started to take over the world, right? And so we were delivering mobile media content via MMS, and so our CEO and CTO, I don't think they really saw eye to eye in terms of the vision moving forward, and so they started to scale back, and I moved on. I decided to try my hand at my own business. It was a holistic wellness business. What I was doing was organizing workshops and retreats all around the world, because what I felt very strongly about was, seeing a lot of professionals in San Francisco having a hard time with work-life balance, and particularly women who have to, take care of their families and then try to thrive in their careers. And, some were lacking skills like negotiation, all these things. A lot of it came down like self-confidence, self-worth, and like self-care. And so I wanted to provide support in that area. So what I did was host these workshops and retreats all over the world. I didn't have a brick and mortar, which was nice. It was like a pop-up, so I didn't have like the overhead of that. And what that allowed for was that I had more money to invest in and support social change projects all around the world, focused on children and women's rights and education. So I did a lot of work with like anti-human trafficking, anti-gender-based violence, mentorship, education. And I did that for about 3 years, but it was really difficult without access to capital. This is not like, it's a lifestyle business. It's not a business that most investors would partake in. So I learned that even though I made a big impact, having access to capital is really important. So I wasn't really profitable in that business, and it was hard to make ends meet. So I was doing a lot of consulting for startups and nonprofits and social enterprises. And when I came back to the States, to San Francisco, I ended up working for a mobile-focused investment bank. So it was like the best of two worlds. And what I did there was I was director of partnerships. I would introduce C-level executives of these like Fortune 500s to emerging technologies all around the world, so they can learn about it. A lot of times corporations get very stuck and siloed in their own businesses that, they don't get exposure to all the great things that people are creating in the world that could really benefit their business. And we would help with like the acquisitions or the acquirers or, strategic partnerships. So that was great, it was a great platform for me to be able to connect with more people all around the world, and help, really build these startup ecosystems, and then, and kind of inject this flavor of social impact and inclusion. A lot of people weren't aware of it. It's not that they don't want to, but a lot of people just didn't know how to create that, or like where to recruit from, or how to get more female founders or underrepresented groups in their talent pools. So it was great to be a resource there. And then through that, a lot of people were starting to approach me from like emerging markets to help them connect with Silicon Valley and learn about Silicon Valley and connect with investors. And so I've been talking a lot to like the Nordic region and Vietnam and India. So it's been a great journey. I left the investment bank in January to focus solely on StartUpRising, which is I guess a collective or a community of tech influencers who are really creating meaningful solutions to the world's biggest problems, and they're really committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what we do is we host a number of community building events. We amplify their voices through storytelling, and collaboratively we've been working on various initiatives, everything from finding diverse perspectives or speakers for conferences and panels. We developed a rapid prototyping inclusion lab, which applies the rapid prototype methodology to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're working on inclusive student mentoring and job shadowing, bring a future leader to Workday. We are working on hackathons and pitch competitions and demo days. So the idea here is moving the diversity conversations into action. There's been a lot of talk recently in the States about diversity, and people are taking pledges, but honestly, if you look at it, a year later, we still haven't seen much change. So what we're trying to do is spearhead action and projects and initiatives to move the needle. And that's really all around the world, not just in Silicon Valley or San Francisco, but, being a part of all these global markets for me has kind of fueled this.
It's fantastic. So in the pre-call, you told me about a particular event that you do, and I find it really interesting. The Jeffersonian Dinners. Can you tell me more about that and what the purpose of it is in your StartUpRising community?
Yeah. So we have a dear friend, Phil Chu, who had told us about the Jeffersonian style dinners, and it goes back to Thomas Jefferson. And what he would do is host small groups, and he would pose a topic for conversation, and everyone could share their perspective on it. And it was it's a really powerful tool to get people to talk about their own experiences, and it's just a way to like get the conversation out of like, what do you do? What do you do for work?
So there's a specific topic.
Yes.
And the people in the room it's a curated group. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a curated group from people in our community, and what I do is I take a look at our membership of like over 600 people, and I see like where the synergies are. Like for instance, our last dinner was during South by Southwest, and we picked VR as a topic. So, I have people from like the travel space and the VR space and augmented reality and investors and then nonprofits and education and attorneys. So it was a nice group, not just technologists, that brought different perspectives and ideas. And we ended up talking a lot about like VR, and how like the various different use cases, like empathy, for instance, or education or politics. So it was great.
Right. Okay. And that's all over a prepared dinner. Is that right?
Yes. So we have a private chef. We host our events at Feastly. Feastly is a social dining platform. So they organize all the like logistics for us, which is nice. And the private chef brings in their own storytelling in terms of like, their inspirations, what brought them to this, and like the inspiration for each dish. And each dinner cuisine, if you will, is also diverse. I try to pick cuisines from all around the world.
Right. Okay. That sounds really interesting. And the guests, they this is a paid event, is that right? Or do you just bring them in?
So they pay in terms of covering the cost. That's about it.
Right. Okay. And so what are some of the outcomes that your guests get from these kind of events? Like what are some solid outcomes that you've seen happen?
First and foremost, what I've seen a lot of is collaborations. They and that's the whole point, right? Like of the curation. I know who would get along really well, and I know who's working on what and who should work with each other. And there's that, and then just the friendships. A lot of people in our community are in later stages of their career, so like usually director, senior director, VP level and above. There's a lot of founders, there's a lot of investors, and many of them are from underrepresented groups. So they say that it's lonely at the top. It's even more lonely when you're a woman or minority at the top. And so one of the outcomes is that they have support and like solid friendships of their peers.
That's a really good outcome, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a really good outcome to have in one of your first event products, right?
Yeah.
So when you just started StartUpRising, how did you get your first people to join in the network? And how did you make decisions on the people you curate, or is the whole network open for anyone to join?
So it's very much curated. We don't like to say that it's exclusive, but it's curated in the sense that we want to make sure that we have like-minded people in our community, people who are aligned with our mission and who embody it in who they are and the work they do in the world. So it's very much curated. In terms of how we got people there, it wasn't very hard. Again, like Ryan and I we grew up in the Bay Area. We're very much entrenched in tech and venture capital. So it wasn't really hard. It was an email and text messages, and people just kept coming, and word of mouth, because we're providing a lot of value and we're meeting a need that doesn't really, it's not being met right now in the existing ecosystem.
Well, when you're born and raised there, I guess it helps a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So what have your biggest challenges been since starting StartUpRising? What are some of the things that have brought you closest to kind of stopping or changing?
I think it's the same problem that all entrepreneurs have, and that's how do I monetize, right? Like this is set up not as a nonprofit. This is a for-profit business, and it's been challenging since I quit my job. Luckily, Ryan has a full-time job and he's very supportive, but it's, I try to figure out like what's the best business model. I don't want to like charge too much for events, and like how do we get money for our initiatives? I'm looking at like sponsorships and grants and whatnot. So just figuring this all out, like how do we make money, and how do we, without money, recruit people to work for us? So that's where I'm at right now, and it's kind of challenging, but it's also very rewarding because most people do want to get involved. They believe in what we're doing, and it's just hard because it's me, the only one working on it full time.
Okay. Yeah, that's certainly a challenge, and I guess you're in your early stages of identifying what works and what doesn't. So you have a few more hurdles to go before you figure it out.
Yeah, it's all experimenting.
That's all good. So let's move back to you as an entrepreneur. What inspires you to do this? What inspires you to keep going on the entrepreneurial journey?
My mother, I always think back to, man, if she could do everything that she did to get us to America, and her journey out of poverty, getting us out of poverty, was through entrepreneurship. And I see the power of entrepreneurship and, the effects that it has. Like, I just want to be that channel. I want to be that person to support people from marginalized populations or under-resourced communities to be able to find that as well.
Yeah, I had the story of how your mother used entrepreneurship to provide for your family. I believe that would be a very strong inspiration to keep you going no matter how hard your challenges were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a mentor?
That's interesting. I wouldn't say I do. I've always had to fight for everything I had, and I've had a very different life than most people. I've had mentors here and there who would provide advice, but I don't know. Like, I feel like throughout school, like, I had to learn by myself. Like, I had to be really resourceful to learn how to, like, apply for colleges and scholarships. And I always had a strategy in mind. Like, even my career, like, every step in my career has been strategic to get to this point. And there's been people who have helped me with advice, but it's been challenging to find a mentor that could relate and could offer the kind of advice I need.
So are you looking? Are you constantly looking for this mentor? Is it something that you think would help in your journey?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like if I could find someone who's had like the immigrant or refugee experience, which I'm finding more of, through the Vietnamese community here in the States, I would love that. I would love that opportunity.
So you mentioned advice a couple times. So do you have any advice that is given to you by a friend or one of those mentors along the way that kind of sticks with you and kind of helps keep you motivated when times are low, or something that you'd like to share with others?
I feel like, a lot of people, first of all, struggle with finding like their purpose or what it is they want to do in life. And what I'd like to share is that, you may not know what you do want to do in life, but you know that like intrinsically there's something that drives you. And sometimes it takes stepping away from everything that you're involved in on like a day-to-day basis, taking a vacation or traveling the world or even just getting away for a weekend and really like reflecting on yourself in terms of like what makes you happy, what doesn't, because life is really short, right? And I feel like there's too many people who are just kind of settling or unhappy with their lives. And I feel like if you could spend that time just identifying these things, it'll really change your life. So I think that's like number one advice, is find out who you are, taking the time to find out who you are and what makes you happy, and two, taking action, right? Like, you could sit on it forever and you could dream and you could wish, but what small thing can you do every day to take you towards that dream? And then lastly, like, never give up. No, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, that's one thing that's always driven me is what's the worst that can happen, and what if I didn't do this thing, would I regret it in 5 years from now? And I'm not afraid to reach out to people. I get a lot of questions like, well, how do you know so and so? They're a high level executive, or they're a visionary, a luminary, and like I just reached out to him on LinkedIn
Right.
and told him, it's like, what's the worst thing that happened? They could ignore me or say no.
Exactly. Yeah. The worst thing that can happen is they say no.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not a really bad thing to happen.
Yeah. And then if they do say no, at least they know who you are now too.
Right.
Like, don't be afraid. Don't let your own negative self-talk or your, the stories you tell yourself limit you.
Okay. I think that's great advice. I think every entrepreneur needs to keep those in the back of their mind, all the time. That's how you move forward.
Yeah.
So Lucy, it's been great talking to you. I think your story is really great and inspirational. I love what you're doing with Startup Rising, and I hope to see you here in Vietnam really soon. So, for our listeners, how can they get in touch with you?
Check out our website. It is www.startuprising.tech. And my email is lucy@startuprising.tech. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or Facebook as well. I'm always happy to chat and help in any way I can.
Okay. I'm going to put those in the show notes, so we'll see that. But again, the website is startuprising.tech, TECH. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience or with me?
I think that's it. If anyone is interested in supporting our work or seeing our work in your local region, feel free to reach out.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy.
All right. Thank you.